I will be the chair, and I will be facilitating the session today. We've got three fantastic speakers with us today, and we're going to talk about moving online. So why is moving online relevant, right? We all moved online in the past 2 years, but I guess there's also a lot of lesson learned about how we move online and why we move online. And I guess that's what we're going to explore with a very strong focus on learners. And the beauty of this panel is that they come from very, very different type of organizations. So we've got, who's going to come up first? Colin Moran, who is National Training and Education Manager with the Irish Rugby Football Union. And then he's going to be followed by Louise Huntington, who is Digital Learning Lead at Metrobank. And last but not least, we've got Jonathan Holmes, who is Digital Learning Manager at Domestic and General. So very different type of organizations, very different type of learning challenges, very different type of learners. And that's where we're all going to start. They're all going to follow the same process. They're going to describe their learners, describe the learners' challenges, the learning challenges for the organizations, and then they're going to show what they've done. Each of them are going to have about 10 minutes, and then we're going to move on to the questions and answers. So I hope you enjoy this format. And as I said, be ready to interact, ask some questions. We really want to make it relevant with you. And without further ado, I would like to invite Colin, who is going to be our first one to share his presentation. I'm going to try to bring up the presentation. Oh,
yeah, that's fine.
Is it good? Mm-hmm. Yeah. Thank you, Colin, and over to you.
Thanks very much, Gail. Thank you all for coming here. You're very welcome, and I know there's many choices that are available to you, and I'm delighted that you chose to attend this session. As an Irish rugby guy, I'm not entirely comfortable having a French person in charge of the whole group, particularly after this year's Six Nations, but we seem to be getting on fine for the last couple of days, so that's a positive. I'll preface it, my name is Colin Moran. I'm the National Training and Education Manager with the Irish Rugby Football Union, or the IRFU. And to preface this, I've been with the organization for 25 years. Now, I'd like to think that it hasn't been the same year reproduced 25 times, as some experience is. And certainly the last 2 years has been an absolutely incredible upheaval, as I'm sure it has been for anyone involved in learning and development in any organization. But particularly for us, in the sense that we never had an e-learning system before, I saw the merit of it, I was convinced of the merit of it prior to COVID, and I was knocking on doors and speaking to directors and trying to convince them that this is something that we should look at, because we're very much an on-field delivery of education. It's rugby balls and cones and boots and whistles, and that's the way it's done. And volunteers give a huge amount of their time to come to the courses that we offer, and the feedback is very positive. But it is onerous in terms of staff provision and also in terms of the volunteers that have to give up their time to do it. So as a really ultra-traditional organization, and it's got all of the best things about that and some of the worst things about being a traditional organization, I guess the worst one being slow to change. Trying to get people to get this idea that we could blend our educational offerings was difficult at times. Then COVID came, and it was like a tsunami hit me. How do we do this? We have to do this, we have to do this. And our biggest concern right from the start was the compliance when it comes to our professional teams, because that's where the money comes in. We had no fans, but we still had to prove to the various sporting organizations and the governing bodies that our players were COVID compliant or COVID aware. So that was the kind of starting point. I'm glad to say that the tsunami has kind of trickled, but there's still a few aftershocks that we're feeling. So the starting point really for me was we needed to evolve. We had to become more modern in the way that we offer things. We also wanted to ensure that when we did those face-to-face offerings, where there's certain things that we have to be on the pitch for, that we would maximize the time. Typically, a previous course would have been you would have arrived at a venue, a rugby club or a stadium, and you would have done some on-pitch stuff, and then inside took off your boots, listened to somebody speaking for an hour, then back outside again, and so on and so forth. It was a lot of kind of toing and froing as kind of typical to sporting organizations. So we really wanted to kind of change that. The other thing that I was really, really interested in, and I've heard a lot about it here, is the idea of self-directed learning opportunities. We're very much a kind of a straight curriculum-based thing. You must do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then you're qualified, inverted commas. And a lot of the time that what we were actually offering in that curriculum was either irrelevant or at best kind of useful to the coaches or referees or medics or whatever. So I was really interested in exploring the idea about offering more self-direction. A very good friend of mine is a lecturer in sports science in University in Cork, back home in Ireland, and he talks about education. It should be more like modern jazz. Education tends to be like classical music, where every note is perfectly mapped out and you follow the perfect flow of it, whereas education really is messy. It's like modern jazz. It kind of comes in and goes. No, I'm not a fan of modern jazz. Let me just clear that up from the start. But I think in terms of the concept of the approach about it kind of evolving within itself is a very interesting one. So who are our learners? We're a really diverse group of learners. Players, to coaches, to medics, to referees, to even fans in terms of things like the ethics and the respect and the values of the sport. Injury prevention, concussion is a huge issue for us. So it really is everything that you can think of that would be involved in a sport. This is our audience. And this doesn't even speak to the staff, in other words, the business side of things, the HR people, the IT people that are within the organization. So I'm primarily focusing on the on-pitch education. You don't have to look at too much of the detail of this, but the point of this is that this is part of our overall strategy, and we call that strategy GEARS. So you can see GEARS down here. It talks about the game, effectiveness, accountability, recognition, and self-sufficiency. We'd never asked before to any of our departments, why do you educate people? And I really took this, completely stole it from Simon Sinek's TED Talk, which you saw, and I'm sure people have seen that on the why things. And it really struck a chord in me because I've been involved in the organization for 25 years and never asked myself, why am I doing this? It was always what? You know, we're doing this course, we've got this, we've developed this resource. So when we actually asked, and when I sat down with each department and said, why are you doing it? It took them weeks to articulate it. Really weeks of putting their heads together as a whole group of people to come up with the whys. So the point of this is that e-learning and our approach to it is part of a wide strategy. It's not just something in and of itself. It has to fit in. So my job is to ensure that our strategy aligns with the whys of the various departments that are involved at a national level. In simple terms, why are we educating? We're educating for competence. People are able to do stuff. We're educating for confidence, that they feel confident to be able to take it on, particularly novice performers, be they players or coaches. Compliance as well, there's a safety and regulatory aspect to it. People have to be concussion aware as players and coaches. And also a huge part for us is connection. So connection with the community and that kind of sense of belonging, which is a key aspect of sport, obviously. So just a quick overview. The traditional approach, back in the day when I started, we had various departments. They were very good at doing what they did, but they didn't want anyone else to know what they did. It was, this is our stuff, we've developed this resource, we've developed this course, and it's excellent. And as a learner, I literally had to go to various different places to find out, you know, to get that particular kind of education. And it also kind of put me in one single strand. So if I got involved in coach development, I was kind of in the coach development river. I didn't get a chance to make it to the bank and try to find and explore something else. So what I've established, and again this is part of the overall philosophy as opposed to particularly in relation to e-learning, is that our philosophical approach is what we call Stepstone. And Stepstone being that we have, and it's the old, some of you might be old enough to remember Blockbusters, you know that board game where you could actually say, I'll have a J bob, I'll have a P bob, and your journey was different to the next person's. So it's kind of that idea that we have some core departments with some core modules. But what we're trying to do is we're trying to build connections between each of these departments, so that something that you find interesting in one might lead you on to another. And that for us is pretty groundbreaking because it really does break apart this idea of the siloed organization. The different colors just refer to different things that could be online or face-to-face. So we're really trying to get an idea of an overall blend of those things. How we educate, I'm not going to go through all of this, but I'd take you straight away to the last point, which is I'd like to think that at least what we're trying to do conceptually is to provide the path, but not the pace. So we're trying to provide a way for people to go, but we don't say you have to do this by now, you have to do this then. Because that's kind of part of the pressure. The worst question that I think an educator can get from a learner is, what do I have left to do to get this? It's kind of a defeatist thing of, well, you're just basically going through the process. They don't actually see the real value in that. So the steps that we took, and I would advocate for anyone who's trying to move or to at least partially adopt an online e-learning presence, would be to establish and promote a philosophy of education first. Unless you get that philosophy where people believe self-directed learning is important, or people believe that people should have access to multiple strands of education within the organization, unless that's established, you have no basis, you have no framework to start, and I think that's important. So for me, I kind of put into this very simple, again, it's for me, it's simple, and I'm trying to highlight it with some very traditionally minded people. And that is really from the education continuum, who holds the power? And for us, it was always the educator. We had all of the knowledge, we had all of the resource, we had all of the information. We sat around the table and said, wouldn't it be good that coaches should know this? And shouldn't referees know that? And we never really looked at what the referees needed or what the coaches needed. It was people like me sitting around saying, I think they should know that. And of course, when you get that, it was really interesting listening to the people talking about diversity, and it really struck a chord to me. Because when I think about the people that sit around the table, they are like me, all of them. And we do have some female representation, but not a huge amount. And again, that's kind of part of the traditional structure. It's also part of laziness. So I think it really is something that I'm going to be taking back to the RFU, and I hopefully would have some impact and some change. But just that continuum, if the educator has all the power, basically education process is about instruction. It's about, here, I've got the information, I'm telling you what to do with it. Whereas at the other end of the continuum, you're basically saying to the learner, try this, or have you seen this? You might be interested in that. So we decided on LMS through the vendor selection process, and the people that we landed on were D2L. Through that D2L process, it threw up a couple of things. Yes, the platform does what we want it to do. The virtual classroom became our COVID classroom. It was how initially we delivered courses, was through that kind of virtual online space, be it through Teams or the virtual classroom in Brightspace. Some of the problems that threw up were the technical and the pedagogical challenges of actually delivering that. If you're used to standing in front of a group on a pitch, talking to them, it's a really, really challenge, big, significant challenge to try to move that online and to speak to them via camera. In terms of grading assessments, so we now have a platform where we can get people to submit stuff, show us your certificate, show us this, and we can grade it or recognize prior learning. The problem from that, as someone described to me, we've gone from scrums to SCORM. And that's true. Most of the people that are now working in our e-learning are people who were appointed because they were good rugby coaches, or they've got a good rugby technical knowledge. And now we're asking them to grade assignments and stuff like that. So that, in terms of staff upskilling, has been a big challenge. Content creation, we use third-party software in terms of the content, and an increasing focus of my job now is to create those subject matter experts within each of those, or to identify the subject matter experts and to train them up so they can build their own content within that department. And the last part is the payment and enrollment, so it's taken away a huge amount of administration because the system, people can register online and can pay for their courses online and attend. But now I also have a relationship with accounting that I never had before. Processing refunds, and this card payment didn't go through. The recent banking update to 3D Secure has been chaotic for me personally. Every time I turn on the email and I see these emails that this process didn't go through and whatever. So I've had to dip into accounting as well. The point being that it's multifaceted, and it has a ripple effect that when you adopt the technology, there are always consequences. There's always going to be problems that emerge. The last one is how do we measure success? Well, we aim to measure it in terms of adoption, so how widely across the organization is it taken on? the accessibility to it, learner feedback through surveys. The reduction in admin hours for staff is huge, and that's what they're very happy about. But now they're just working in a different way, and that's also challenging. So they have less to do, but some of the stuff that they have to do is new to them, and that can be a problem. And even things like external awards. So we're very proud to have won a silver medal in the Brandon Hall Awards last year as well for kind of innovation in learning and technology. So that was personally a very proud moment. So I look forward to taking your questions and move on. And on Twitter, I'm at Collie Coaching, if anyone is on Twitter and would like to follow. Thank you so much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Colleen. Thank you. You've done very well. And next, I would like to welcome Louise, who is going to talk us through approach with Metro Bank. Which one is it? That's this one, right? There you go.
Okay, hi. Can everybody hear me? Okay, cool. So I'm going to be talking through how Metro Bank are growing a learning community in a really new sort of hybrid world, and the things that we're doing to enable this and enable growth in this area. So probably a lot of you, and including myself, went to an interesting talk yesterday around social learning and looking at the systems that you have in place within your organization already, which are enabling learning and which are enabling social interaction to happen. So when we started thinking at Metro about how can we really develop and grow our learning culture online, we first looked at some of the great systems that we already have in place that are really promoting learning and promoting sharing and skills throughout the bank. So things, for example, like our amazing behaviors. So as an example there, we have Zest is contagious, share it. Or we have ask if you're not sure, bump it up. And these are all our values which are promoting that kind of sharing across our bank. Things like belonging through Yammer stories. We're constantly sharing stories through Yammer. Through our M-Place as well, we're doing blogs already and things like this. Things as well like celebrations, so we have Magic Fridays where we wear red on a Friday to really celebrate our culture, and also you can see here when we have a special occasion, we're wearing red as well. So to bring that to life a little bit, I thought I'd show you my own personal magic moments at Metro. So a few things, this was my first day when I first got my job. I was surprised and delighted. That's a big part of who we are in our culture. It's my 1-year Metroversary there. This is some cute dog I found running around, I got a photo with. And we had a concert during COVID. It was all virtual, but to celebrate our 10-year celebration of the stores being open. And then you can see here, this is actually on my wedding day with my husband. It was actually by chance. We walked past Metro, and I was like, quick, get a photo! But we have a saying in Metro, we're all about sort of community and putting community at the heart of what we do. And we have a saying which is around fans, not customers. And it's the same for our colleagues, so fans, not colleagues. So you can see we have this really great culture in place. So we thought about, okay, how can we use these systems to really develop learning in a hybrid way? So one of the first things that we also did after looking at what we already had in place was we thought about who our learners are, and we put some personas together through research. So you'll see here we have some of our colleagues who are in store, for example, and they're often the younger sort of age groups. And then we have our colleagues who are working in our offices. And then we also have colleagues, for example, who are in our call centres. So it's quite diverse. But you can see here some of the things that we found out, and this is very high level of some of the research we did, just to flash it up. But you can see that we had a real sort of a fondness of things like YouTube and learning from YouTube. TikTok as well came up quite a lot, not only in just sort of the younger age groups, but also in the sort of ages of 30s as well, which is really interesting. Mobile learning as well, we found out is really key, and people are really interested in that. And then some blockers to learning. So we found out that if people can't find what they're looking for, that's going to be really frustrating, and that's going to stop you from wanting to go ahead and carry on with what you're trying to learn. So once we found out our personas and a sort of overview of who our colleagues are, we then also, and we do this really frequently, put together focus groups and use user research with our colleagues. So how do we do this? Well, for example, we use our platform like Yammer to send out a message saying, do you want to get involved? Bachelor Bank University needs you. Come and join in the conversation. You can decide in what learning we're going to sort of move ahead with. And we found out things like how people like to learn, how much time they spend on learning, how long they want to spend, bite-size, things like this. And we did this through face-to-face focus groups like this one, but also things like using our LXP to get to survey our responses, and then also things like Figma, which is similar to Miro, I think, as well. So it's like a product development tool, but you can do things like Fig Jams, where you have sort of sticky notes and you can brainstorm together. So that was a really good way where we could find out what's relevant to our colleagues, what do people really want. And then we looked at piloting. So again, yesterday in the same sort of social learning conversation, they talked about piloting or trialing things in really small bite-sized chunks, which is what we're really passionate about doing at Metro. So as an example here, we had a business need where we wanted to introduce smart objectives into the company in a more formalized way and have those uploaded onto our LXP. And then they would then help the review process throughout the year. So we wanted to get colleagues creating these smart objectives and also aligning them more to our business strategy. So how did we do this? Well, we thought this would be a great time to really pilot and not do, we could just, roll out some mandatory training. Here's your smart objectives, write them, watch the video. But we thought, how can we take all these things that we've been looking at that we do so well in our bank and bring this to life in a sort of hybrid learning environment? And we came up with a sort of campaign approach. And a few key bits of this was, for example, having some really key leadership support in backing this campaign about smart objectives, why they're important to you, but also important to the bank. And you'll see here, this is Carol Frost is our Chief People Officer, and she has a big part to play in some of this, which you'll see in a video shortly. And then we also did things like curating learning. So we found online resources around smart objectives, and we also had videos which explained our strategy from some of our key stakeholders as well in the business. And then you'll see here, colleagues could also then add content to the channel of this optional learning as they went. So if they found a resource that they really liked, they could add that in as well and share that with colleagues. So again, that whole kind of sharing mentality. And then finally, we thought, okay, how can we make this really relevant? And some of the great stuff we've been hearing throughout the conference around novelty and making learning stick. How can we make this really hit home? So we got our colleagues to get involved in sharing what their goals were, whether it was personally or professionally. And we did that in videos and in blogs, so written blogs. And we also then came up with a sort of a commsing approach where we asked our colleagues to make TikTok-style videos. So again, based on some of the stuff that we'd learned about how our colleagues like to learn. And we did this hashtag game-changing goals. So we looked all through TikTok, and I'm old school, like I only have LinkedIn. So I was looking through TikTok and writing down these hashtags, and then all of me and my colleagues like, oh, we could do this. How would this work? And came up with this sort of game-changing goals, commsing way of getting people involved. So I'm going to show you a video which brings some of the user gen side to life.
Hi people! We've got an exciting year ahead and brand new people team objectives to get our teeth into. So don't forget to share with your team and the people you know what you're hoping to achieve next year, either personally or professionally, in this month's Invite Challenge.
example of some of the great content that we got from our users, and then we put it into a montage as well, as you can see here. And that was actually an idea from Media Zoo, who I'm in contact with, so shout out, thank you. And these were just a few quotes of people sort of getting involved in the conversation. And we also had on our LXP a way that you could tag people to then go and do the challenge for themselves, share their personal goal, their professional goal. And as I say, just a few bits of the discussion, but it was really, when you went on to the different individual items, there was really a lot of chat going on, a lot of tagging, a lot of people getting involved, because it was that personal interest as well as that then looking at the professional goals as well. So a few things that we did along the way was we thought about how to create the right sort of environment to enable this approach, this campaign approach. And we thought about what kind of tech would work best. So obviously we had that big kind of fondness for mobile that we saw at the beginning. So we encouraged our colleagues to start shooting with their mobile phones and then uploading straight onto our LXP from there. We also put together some toolkits. So we've already done quite a lot of user-generated content before with our Wellbeing Hub and this kind of thing. So we have toolkits and how-to guides on how to write a blog, for example, or how to put together a selfie video really simply, like just using your phone. And then the other thing that we did was we connected with the team leaders involved in the pilot. And as you can see with Carol, and literally we had that again, bump it up if you want to ask a question. I literally Teams messaged Carol and said, hey, could you get involved with this? And she was like, yeah, it's great. So advice is don't be afraid to reach out to your leaders, and actually people do want to get involved, probably like 100% of the time, generally. So connect with your leaders and also get them to encourage people to get involved. So if they're running, for example, like team huddles, spread the word in that huddle as well and say, have you done this? Have you looked at this great learning? Have you submitted your SMART objectives type thing? So a little bit on the stats, and these are, because it was a pilot, we're sort of still evaluating as of now. So you can see these are some sort of engagement stats around viewership. So you can see that we had 60% of our pilot group actually involved in watching the curated learning we put together. 80% of the group watched the user-generated stuff, so the videos, the sort of TikTok campaign. And the leadership message as well was really popular. So again, just shows how powerful, and as we've heard, numerous times, the importance of leadership. We had 58% of the group posting a review or some kind of discussion. 35% contributed content, which was actually, we were pretty proud of, because it's like on TikTok, you have the posters who like to post videos, and then the people who are silently, just watching and commenting. So that was pretty good for us. Highly rated, and then at the end we actually had 100% of the pilot group uploaded their objectives onto the system, which we were really pleased with. So yeah, what are we going to do to sort of sustain this? Well, we're actually coming up to our quarterly review conversations, and it would be interesting to find out and do a focus group with some of our managers around how smart were these objectives. Were they realistic? Are we on par to sort of achieve some of these targets? So that's something that we're going to be doing as well to get involved in. But that's just a little snippet of some of the zesty, cool things we're doing at Metro. But if you'd like to learn more, ask me some questions in just a bit, and also get in touch with me. Thanks very much.
Hi everyone, I'm Jonathan. I work for Domestic and General. And over the past 12 months, I've been with the company for about 18 months. Over the last 12 months, we've been changing our approach to learning across the board. A little bit about Domestic and General as a company. So we provide warranties for domestic appliances. Our purpose really is to keep your world running. Typically, those are sort of crisis moments when the washing machine doesn't work and you really need to get that sort of item washed, or maybe your boiler has broken down and it's just coming into the winter. About 16 million customers across the globe. We're primarily a contact center based company. And whilst we do have a strategy for growth and transformation, our the employee base really is around about 3,000 people. About 50% of those are working in our contact centres as agents and sort of complaints handlers. So we'll talk about primarily, those really are the learners that I'm going to talk about today. They're a busy group of people, so here's a couple of them. They've got a tough job, right? They're on the phones day in, day out. It's high pressured. They're talking to customers. They're taking care of their needs. They're supporting them in perhaps potentially times of crisis. And then they've got to manage those conversations, and they've got to manage and navigate the systems and the processes that they're being asked to use within the company. Part of the reason for part of our transformation is to sort that out. And then also they've got their targets which they need to meet. So they do an absolutely amazing job, but it's our job in L&D really primarily to support them. And I think our focus here is on the sort of 4 areas. So last year we onboarded in the region of 700 new agents into the UK. So it's a lot of people that we need to bring up to a level of competence, level of performance in the most seamless and timely way that we can. Supporting change. There's a lot of change that's happening within the contact centres and then more broadly within the company as well. And the pace of that change is not slowing down, as I'm sure it isn't in a lot of our industries. In terms of leadership development, of course, that's we put a lot of resource into developing leaders across the whole of our organisation. And then, being a regulated industry with the FCA, we've got our continued professional development obligations as well. So that's the Insurance Distribution Directive. Now, this isn't the only focus that we have, but I would say that primarily that's where the resources go. That's where a lot of L&D focus happens. We do have a few campaigns that go sort of beyond this, that take on a much broader sort of learner set. So environment, social and governance challenges, diversity, inclusion, those kind of issues. But just today, I figured we'll just really focus on what we've been doing in this space. So we tried to be, part of our culture is to be supportive and connected. And that kind of philosophy, if you like, underlies or underpins the approach that we've tried to take in terms of shifting our very traditional learning approach to something which is much more blended. And you can see that our focus has been on those sort of 4 areas of induction, bringing people up to competence pretty quickly, managing change, upskilling the workforce to work from maybe one outbound type of call to maybe an inbound type of call, change, and then the leadership development as well. In terms of developing our digital and blended solutions, what we've applied is a way of thinking about patterns of design. So we found this quite helpful if we start to think of actually the situation of, for example, the agent masterclass. We'll talk about that. The agent masterclass was born out of the idea that very, very quickly we needed to upskill a whole range of agents to be able to deal with an influx of calls that seasonally happens, an influx of calls around boilers. So what was happening was there's a lot of transfers going on. This is to the detriment of the sort of customer experience. So we needed to somehow very, very quickly make sure that the agents were engaged, they knew what they needed to do, but also they were able to take action very, very as quickly as possible. So we came up with this sort of design pattern that, this is Monica, I should say, you can see her there. She is what we call a super agent in the company. She's very high performing. very well liked. She's been in the company for a while. She does everything compliantly, but she gets results as well. So effectively, we used her as a subject matter expert. She's a known face, so there's this sort of interest. People were interested in the celebrity of Monica, if you like. And we developed a series of micro videos. Each video was not really much longer than about 90 seconds, 2 minutes. So in each of those videos, she gave hints, she gave tips, she gave best practices on how to handle the types of calls which we knew were going to be coming in. As part of those videos, we also included more sort of interactive activities. So they were very much what we might call interactive videos. It wasn't passive watching. It was, here's your video, and here are some sort of questions to draw forth from you what the key messages were on each of those videos. But again, each one was not much longer than about 2 minutes. As part of the pathway that we created, we also had downloadable resources that Monica had used in her presentations. We included what we called a digital coach. So this was almost like an interactive toing and froing where particular conversational situations were presented. Learners were then asked, well, what would you say in this type of situation? And then they were given feedback on the type of response that they were given. We also included a nudge, and that nudge was to make sure that you speak to your team leader or speak to your colleagues if you do have any other queries, if you have any other questions around that particular subject. And then finally, at the very end, we gave a certificate of completion as well, which we found was quite added to the engagement. So as a design pattern, we can now take this masterclass approach. So here's your presenter, here's your interactive videos, here's your bite size, here's your resource, here's your nudge to engage socially, and we can now apply that across different areas. So, for example, we've now got a pipeline of development for these agent masterclasses. We've got QA, we've got quality assurance, we've got sales techniques. They've become very, very popular amongst business leaders and amongst agents and team leaders. So, quite a successful approach. The same kind of mentality in terms of those patterns we applied to the blended induction modules, our digital change briefings and leadership developments. I'll talk very briefly about perhaps the blended induction modules. So the issue that we were having, we shifted online with COVID. We shifted to a virtual environment, so we were, Zoom, MS Teams, etc. That was all done. What we needed to do was take it to the next level, and that next level was a consistency of messaging, a consistency of experience, and a ramp up, if you like, of the performance metrics that we were expecting to see at the very end. So what we came up with was another pattern, which was effectively taking all of the knowledge-based elements of that learning journey, digitizing that, and again, through research, we knew that video-based content was going to be accepted, was going to be sort of welcomed. So a lot of that knowledge content is video-based. Again, interactive video-based where possible. And that allows us to give that sort of consistent, one best way, if you like, of ensuring that what we're asking agents to do, what we're training them to do on the foundations is as consistent as it can be across the contact centres. What it then also allows us to do is to support a coaching culture, and our learning specialists, our learning delivery specialists, who previously spent most of their time sort of a bit like this, talking at people. What they're now much more able to do is spend their time saying, okay, let's have a look at how you're applying this knowledge in the actual job itself. So providing sort of coaching feedback, providing personalised, targeted sessions around what areas that people need to develop and to focus on in order for them to get through their induction. Okay, let's shift on. So very briefly, most of our impact assessments have, everything is very much tied to a business metric as far as possible. I won't go through all of these, but you can see there, and perhaps we'll talk about this a little bit later, but one of the key things that from learning development that we were trying to get across is the change in learning behaviours. So that shift was from sitting in your training, accepting the training, and then going and performing. Now the behaviour is much more, I've done my training, I need to speak to somebody else, I need to share that knowledge with people, I need to speak to my peers and sort of work across boundaries. And that's been quite a success when we've piloted, when we've surveyed after many of these interventions. A quick word about how we've done this. So one of the things, we had to do this very, very quickly. As I said, I've really not been with the company that long. So it was imperative that we built a reputation. I think people, we're at Learning Technologies Conference, but my view is that the most important part of all of that package is the people, it's the relationships. Nobody's going to open the door to you and let you in if you haven't established those relationships, if you haven't got credibility. However, in order to get that reputation, that credibility, you need to deliver results. In order to deliver results, I need to know, so what technology have I got? What have we already got in play? We already had an LMS. We had Yammer. We've got some great sort of social tools. We just weren't really using them particularly in a strategic way. It leads on to L&D skills. It's interesting to hear Colin talk about the need for accountancy skills. So we haven't quite gone that far yet. But certainly in my localized team, videography, animation, graphics, SCORM, instructional design. Yeah, the list is endless in terms of how we're trying to educate the rest of L&D, if you like, in terms of how to achieve a greater capacity to be able to deliver some of these solutions. And then key to all of this is collaboration. L&D may have previously worked in isolation, many companies do, many departments do, but an absolute key to delivery has been collaborating ourselves, so learning specialists, learning designers, digital learning specialists, all working together to provide a product, but then also with the business. Us in L&D, we're no longer the specialists in how operations work. As soon as we come out of operations and take a learning role, we no longer are as up to speed as we could be. So we're no longer the SMEs. We then therefore need to collaborate across the business for our SMEs and our content. I can see Gail is saying, right, come on, time up. But yes, thank you very much. I'm sure we'll get into some of those subjects in the next half hour.
Thank you very much, Jonathan. Thank you very much, Lou and Colin. Please, we're going to have a Q&A sessions now. And if you would like to ask your questions, feel free to raise a hand. We're also going to have another board. If you don't want to touch the microphone, which absolutely fine. Not sure how I'm going to open the next quiz, if I do it from here. But some very interesting things that we've seen today with those three speakers is that it all starts with the human. It all starts with the learners. And we've seen that different learners, different work environments, different challenge. And then we obviously have seen some very different solutions on the back of that, which is great. I would like to actually, in the previous questions that we've brought up, there was a question about stakeholder, which I think is quite interesting. And I would like to ask all of you individually, which was your biggest challenges in terms of stakeholders and who were your supporters? So if, maybe Louise, if you want to start?
Yeah, I mean, for me, I sort of mentioned about our culture and about this sort of feeling of sharing knowledge anyway across the bank. So for me, it was, as I mentioned, like quite easy to get in touch with some of our leaders and ask, like, can you share your knowledge, because it's something that we do already, quite sort of day to day. But I think some key sort of elements of how, for example, how did I get the Chief People Officer like Carol to get involved, particularly if she doesn't have a lot of time, is by, I think, being very sort of human and personal. And for example, in my email when I sent it across, I put in the whys, you know, what's in it for you, what's in it for our colleagues, why is this going to help us and Metro and our strategy. And then also for things like the tech side, where Carol's filming herself, is putting together, as I say, that really quick sort of how-to toolkit, having that attached to the email. Like, it's going to, you know, it won't take you very long. It will be a 5-minute exercise. You can actually self-record on our LXP as well. So here's how to do that step-by-step type thing. And really like the time involved as well, the time limits, and making it all sort of really clear what the ask is. I'd say that was really helpful when trying to get someone to do something that's maybe a bit out of their comfort zone as well. But Carol's great. She did it at home. You can see that's just in her sort of home office. But yeah, I think that's probably the big ones for me, is that sort of human element and being cautious of people's time and making it really clear what the ask is and how you can support them to do it as well.
Thank you very much, Louise. Colin or Jonathan, maybe you want to?
Yeah, I think the biggest challenge that I found with the stakeholders is trying to convince them that e-learning can work for them, for their particular needs. Some of them are very, very particular in relation to the way that they want things done, or the learning outcomes that they want for the learners that they deal with. So for example, referees, I think referees across all sports are incredible people, but they're can be hard to understand sometimes in terms of the way they perceive the world. They're oppressed, everybody's against them, everybody hates them, and yet they still front up and perform. But they have a very particular way of working within our organization, and you know, they're saying, well, in the old days, we used to do this and we used to do this, and I'm like, well, it doesn't do that, but it might do this, and I'm trying to tilt them just to nudge them a little bit in the right direction. And once they see that it works, then it's happy. They're happy. So it's trying to make them see what the benefit is for them, as opposed to the inherent benefits of e-learning. It's the usefulness.
Thank you, Colin. Jonathan, anything to add?
Yeah, absolutely. So my biggest challenge was actually knowing who the stakeholders were. I was very new to the business, and no one said, look, here's a bunch of stakeholders you need to speak to and develop relationships with them. So that's probably the biggest challenge. Secondly, am I okay? Yeah, you can be heard. Oh, okay. Oh, that's you. So yeah, that was the first thing. But as soon as I found out, you know, who they were, I think probably, you know, developing a good relationship with them, developing an understanding, going through iterations of what might work for them, what are their challenges, and how might learning work for them, and then having a conversation around learning, you know, digital solutions and how that might work. I tend to work under the presumption that digital learning has a solution for most problems. It's just my mindset. So I probably sort of wear the badge for modern learning approaches whenever I have a stakeholder meeting. The key that really sort of opened things for me was delivering something that made a difference quite early on, and in our situation, that was we had a dusty old learning management system that no one really liked or visited. So I focused on that the first sort of 6 months, redesigned it, looked at the user journeys on it, and delivered that back, and that then started to gain a sort of, you know, traction really.
That's great. I don't know if you can hear me. Thank you, the three of you. We've got some other questions coming on the board, but once again, if you want to ask verbally, because we're in a human world and it's great, please feel free to raise your hand, and we're going to bring a microphone to you. Some great question coming up here. And I think we are going to start with what would you do differently? What would you, looking back, would you have done anything differently? Or maybe something would have made your life easier or quicker?
I tend to have a very positive outlook on stuff in general, so I'd like to look back and go, I would do nothing differently. But certainly what I would have done differently was I wouldn't have stressed myself as much as I did. When COVID came, I referred to it earlier on, about the compliance part, I got a phone call on a Friday from one of our directors saying that we needed a COVID course up and running by Wednesday. We literally had nothing. There was no slides, there was no information, it was complete blank slate. And this was for one of our professional teams and for the other professional team that was visiting Ireland to play the match. So I just worked constantly. I mean, ridiculous amount of stress. The Friday, the Saturday, the Sunday, literally on the Wednesday, I was like, there it is. It was more in hope than anything else. But it was very stressful, and the one thing that it was effective, and I think what I would change is just to be satisfied with it being good enough. I think people stress themselves that it has to be perfect, and I think good enough is good enough, and I would really encourage people to take the approach that if it does a job well enough to get people where you want them to get to, everything else is just sprinkles on top. It really should be just good enough.
Thank you, Colleen. Louise?
Yeah, for us, as I mentioned, like we're really keen on running pilots and really trying to innovate and see what's working and talking to our learners as well. But certainly, I mean, what I showed you here was, I guess, everything drawn together from little bits that we'd been doing over, you know, since the pandemic sort of kicked off, and we were then really innovating at speed. And putting all these things together. But certainly when we first started doing things like blogs, for example, we had, I showed you the tile where it says you can add your own content or that kind of thing. We had a sort of, you know, get involved in blogging, but we didn't have the leadership backing or the buy-in. But we had that tile on our LXP, you know, add your blog, here's how to do it. How many people do you think that we got involved in blogging? Not that many, because we didn't have everything sort of married together with the toolkits, with the leadership buy-in as well. So I think, like, when you're piloting, especially initially, don't be too hard on yourself if something doesn't go quite right. And, you know, they always say learn from your failures, be agile, that kind of thing. So we looked at that and we thought, okay, people aren't, you know, uploading as we would like. What can we do differently? We'll get Carol on board, we'll get the leaders involved, we'll get people sharing in their huddles, trying to get people uploading. We'll make it more relevant, we'll make sure we really scroll through TikTok, see what's really cool, what's trending, ask our learners what they like. So that was really interesting. But I think even here where I showed you the montage at the end, and I said we sort of use this more as a comsing piece. Initially when we started the pilot, again, we had a channel where you could upload your mini videos onto the channel. And would I do it that way again? Again, it was a little bit slow, especially to start with, like to sort of kick it off. So probably next time we would get the team and colleagues involved to begin with, put this montage together, and then send that montage out on Yammer, have it on our LXP sort of big screen, so that it's all there for people to be like, wow, this is really cool. I'm going to get involved, and I can see everybody else doing it, so that's really awesome.
Thank you very much. And to link to one of the questions there, and also one of the questions we had at the beginning, but also for those of you who attended Nigel Payne's session yesterday, how comfortable are you establishing the impact on the business of those programs? And I know it's a 1 million questions, and it's not always an easy one, but if we've got like a couple of minutes for each of you to say, you know, where you're at, where you're planning on going with this impact measurement, that would be great.
Yeah, I can go first. So
Yeah.
Our induction, that's one of the primary focuses where all of our L&D resource goes. We've got a big team of delivery staff, but there are very, very clear metrics already established for that. So what does performance look like against target in terms of, you know, as an individual contributor after 3 weeks, after 6 weeks, and then after sort of 12 weeks. And those are business metrics. They are very much, you know, sales, their average call handling time, and so on. So in terms of those metrics, I think domestic in general, yeah, we're hyper focused on those kind of things. So then the flip side is, well, what about the learning experience itself? And you know, which arguably could be, well, yeah, what's your retention look like? So we're constantly looking at retention, looking at ways of improving the experience within the first sort of 3 weeks or so, and beyond, to to look back at those metrics around, so how many people do we need to onboard and how much of that is due to attrition. But yeah, that's typically what we focus on.
So Nigel would be proud of you. You started with the business in mind and you worked backward into what the employees were supposed to achieve and everything in between. So wonderful. Louise and Colin.
Well, I always feel a little, not uncomfortable, I always feel a little at a disadvantage when people talk about business metrics and the kind of bottom line and the money, because I don't really have anything to do with that yet, right? It's probably coming down the track, but yet I don't. So for me, being focused on rugby development, a lot of our success is measured in terms of what we call a better game. Now, a better game is a kind of a catch-all phrase to mean that there's fewer instances of referee abuse because the referees are performing well, that there's fewer instances of touchline aggravation between coaches because the coaches understand how they should perform ethically and uphold the values, that players continue to play the game because they're getting good coaching so that we don't lose numbers. So for me, it's almost like a sentiment thing. And yes, we do track, enrollments and we know how many players are playing and so on, but that can fluctuate over time. So it's an area that I'm really, really interested in, and I'd actually love to hear from anyone here who has experience about capturing that sentiment of what it's like to be part of this very wide, broad-ranging education and in a sport, because that's something I don't think that we're very good at yet.
Thank you very much, Colin, for your honesty. And it is different organizations, different environments, and sometimes a bit less clarity. Louise, how are you positioning yourself in this mix of impact measurement?
Yeah, so for us, we have lots of different, as a bank, we have, for example, like our regulatory learning, we have lots of different things going on, and then we have, as you can see here, we're trying to get more of this optional culture of learning going as well. So things like, for example, in the past, again, with the pilot, we've piloted a GDPR 6-month campaign where we had 6 GDPR pillars, and these were rolled out over the course of the 6-month period, so 1 a month. And in this campaign, again, it started with the stakeholders about, let's look at the data. What are the problems that we're seeing here? How many data breaches have we had, for example, and how many of those have been so bad that they've been escalated to the ICO? These are all super low, but these are some of the things as a bank we've got to keep on top of, risk and all these elements. So for things like that, looking at metrics, it's very much project dependent. So with GDPR, we looked at, have data breaches, personal data breaches gone down, as an example. With things like some of the more campaign work and things around like smart objectives, a little bit more difficult to get that sort of solid metric of, you've written a smart objective, so you've done this, this is what you've achieved for your business strategy. But as I mentioned, we're then looking at doing focus groups later down the line with managers, with colleagues to find out and check in what movement is on that as well. So it's sort of a two-piece approach.
Thank you. And I'm going to come back to the second question from the left, right at the end. But I would like first, because I think it flows better, how did you develop new skills, basically? Did you train people internally to develop new skills? Did you look outside the organizations? And long terms, what is going to be the mix?
Well, the first person that needed training was me. I had no experience in e-learning whatsoever. I advocated it and they basically said, there you go. And I had to go back to school and train myself, webinars. The company were very good at providing the training, but it was just hard work. Now I'm in a place where I've kind of become the trainer, so I'm trying to help people to use it as well. But we're still some way away from building what I would call an efficient education team. So that's my objective for this coming year, is to actually have a team where then both content design or content creation and also the kind of the general setup and structuring of the overall strategy within each department will be taken on by someone and supported by me rather than being the kind of one-man band.
Thanks, Colin. What about you, Louise and Jonathan?
Yeah, so for us, like before the pandemic, the majority of our training was face-to-face, so we had a lot of face-to-face trainers. that we then needed to reskill, and how can we get you, using our LXP in great ways and creating digital content. So, certainly there was a reskilling there, but also it was about finding out, getting to know people on a personal level and what skills they have outside of work. So we found out, for example, that we have colleagues who are making videos, they use, DSLR cameras outside of work a lot. So we're like, this is great, let's get involved with this. And what are your passions? What do you want to get involved in? Okay, let's get a team behind that. You train people on how to do this. So it was really trying to see, what the skill sets we had there, and using a skills matrix, and then doing sort of micro, upskilling within the team as well.
That's great. So if you look at the numbers, so what percentage is now done in-house and what percentage is done outside? So just one sentence each. Jonathan, do you want to start?
95% in-house.
Perfect. What about you, Colin?
90% in-house.
Okay, great. And you, Louise?
Yeah, I mean, we're probably similar, sort of 90%, but we are looking more now at sort of external aggregators as well to try and get in more richer content for some of our specialized departments. So areas like risk, or some of this stuff are like really specialized IT skills where, we might not have the resource and the time to really develop some of these really unique learning items. So yeah, it's an interesting, we're on a new sort of transition into that.
That's great, thank you.
Gail, can I just say something about the skills piece?
Oops,
sorry.
Of course. Go ahead.
So one of the strategies that I employed was to gain an interest in what we were doing, around the business, to understand that digital methodologies provide like a high quality learning experience, and almost I sort of conceptualize it in terms of supply and demand. So what I managed to do was effectively unearth this huge demand for what we were providing, which then left me with a conundrum. Well, I don't have the capacity to be able to sort of respond to that supply. So that's when we started implementing a sort of capacity building strategy. And in really, really simple terms, it was, okay, stakeholder, you want this to happen. How much budget have you got? None. Okay, so a second option is that we can, using the authoring tools and methods that we have, we can upskill you as part of we created a sort of digital learning community. So draw them into that community and then enable them to upskill themselves, particularly in the sort of design side, instructional development side of things, to build collateral. And that way, then all of a sudden, the capability of delivering those kind of options goes from, you've got 2-3 people in the team to, well, you've got another 2 people for that particular department. You've got another 2 people for that particular area of the business, that region. So that's the kind of methodology that I've kind of employed. It doesn't always work because, of course, they might not have the time to upskill themselves, at which point you can then revisit the conversation around, well, how critical is it that you need this and what budget do you have in order to help us help you?
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Jonathan. I realize we're almost out of time, but I think it is a very good question that we've got here. And I'm going to ask you all to actually have a little think, and I'm going to pop another clap, to think, what are your takeaways from these sessions? What would you like to try? What would you like to apply? So hold on to that thought. I'll bring it up now. And in the meantime, I would like you to, I would like our panelists, if they can, to share what is the situation with people going through the learning in almost a negative way, I would say, or as Andy Lancaster put it a few years ago, working with the compliance department rather than with the learning department, aka I've done that, even though I've got no retention whatsoever, and I don't really care about it. So what's your strategy? Do you have numbers? Do you have metrics? How do you approach it? And you've got about a minute each.
Well, we don't really have feedback or numbers on that. When you talk about compliance, there are certain things that people have to do. That's just being grown up about it. So you can't opt out of the health and safety aspects or the integrity in the workplace or IT security. You've got to do certain things. That's built into it. I saw someone on Twitter a few weeks ago, and they were talking about adopting a new process. And they said that the phrase used was respect the resistors. And I thought that was really good, actually. So, if people do have genuine issues engaging with it, whether it's out of a lack of skills themselves, whatever. I think it's incumbent upon us to sell it to them and to make it work. But people can't opt out of things that they have to do. I mean, that's just being blunt about it.
Great, thanks, Colin. Louise or Jonathan, do you want to add? Maybe you, Louise?
This is how you sort of get this sort of negative views of compliance and that kind of thing.
A bit higher. I'm not sure we can hear you very clearly.
Hello?
Yeah.
Well, I mean, for us, for example, we're moving away from the traditional views of, this is learning, you have to do it type thing. As I've mentioned, we're obviously a bank. We have our regulations that we have to adhere to. But we're looking at these sort of ways like the campaign approach where, let's say, I don't know, the learning is around InfoSec that month. How can we create a campaign around it and get, relevance and colleagues involved in bringing this to life, within their own personal and professional lives as well? So that's really helping to drive engagement with some of our more regulatory content as well.
Thank you very much. And Jonathan?
So for us, we have a mandatory learning calendar, regulated. Must-have, so we constant conversations with our compliance team on looking at how do we alter that. At the moment, we're altering it, so the calendar remains the same, but it's how we present the content, which is the point of difference for last year. We are looking at, well, how do we come away from just having the calendar that people must do? Obviously, those are quite long, lengthy conversations in terms of process and regulatory requirements. I think similarly to what Lou, you're saying, we're looking at cybersecurity, for example. There's some things which you must do. You must evidence that you've trained, but then across the board, we're looking at, so how do we build a campaign for to make people care about cybersecurity? And importantly on that, I think it's not necessarily at the organisational level. It's how do you care as an individual? What matters to you? Because we all live in the same space, we all live in the same world. Cybersecurity is important at home as it is in the organisation. So we're looking at targeting sort of that kind of messaging.
That's great. Unfortunately, we're out of time. It is a real pleasure. So I would like all of us to give you a big clap, but just a quick recap maybe on key elements. I think we've all established that it all starts with the learners and the business need, and how you bridge the business needs with the learner. There is not one solutions fit all, depending on the organizations, depending on the type of learners, depending on the budget. There are different options available. I think it's been really well said that it is really what works, and start small probably was one of the tips. Start small, evaluate. Don't be too perfectionist, because it is going to change. I think digital is, if we've learned anything in the past few days, that digital is changing, it's going to carry on changing. So whatever you're feeling quite proud today will kind of probably have to be changed or seriously amended within the next 24 to 36 months. I think we can safely go there. So I think that was 3 brilliant case studies that's kind of bring together the diversity of options. And looking at what you've taken away today, I'm really excited that you've taken away the personas, because I think that was quite key in the development of these sessions, who are the personas of the learners, and that's definitely a place to start. And definitely looking at stakeholders, and definitely also looking at culture, which has been a theme, I believe, through many different sessions through the conference. So thank you very much. I'm sorry we've overrun and we're standing between you and coffee, but please join me in giving a big clap to our group, to our 3